August of 1944, the Allied armies are breaking out of Normandy, a tidal wave of men and steel rushing toward the German border. The Third Army, under the flamboyant, relentless General George S. Patton, is in the vanguard, a spearhead driving east with breathtaking speed. His objective, the Rhine River and the heart of Germany itself. Nothing, it seemed, could stop him. But war is a chaotic, unpredictable beast. And in one desperate, pivotal moment, everything would change. Not because of a German counterattack, but because of a single, staggering order. An order that would force Patton to do the unthinkable, to halt his triumphant advance, to turn his entire army not toward the enemy, but away from it, to execute a 90-degree pivot of over 250,000 men in just 48 hours. What could possibly justify such a drastic, risky maneuver? And what did the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, say to his stunned staff when he learned Patton had done it? This is the story of a gamble that defied all military convention, a story not of a battle, but of a breathtaking strategic pirouette that would alter the course of the war in the West. To understand the sheer audacity of this move, we must first set the stage. By late August 1944, Operation Cobra had succeeded. The German front in Normandy had collapsed. General Patton's Third Army, activated on August 1st, had exploded into the open country of France. His XX Corps took Nantes, reaching the Loire River. His 12 and 15 Corps raced eastward, covering sometimes 40 miles a day. The atmosphere at Third Army headquarters was electric, a heady mix of victory and momentum. Patton believed, with every fiber of his being, that he could plunge into Germany before the year was out. He famously urged his commanders, "We'll win this war, but we'll win it only by fighting and showing the Germans we have more guts than they have." But at the supreme headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, General Eisenhower faced a different, more complex reality. Ike was not just a battlefield commander, he was a politician and a coalition manager. His responsibilities stretched far beyond the Third Army's sector. He had to consider logistical constraints. Every gallon of fuel, every shell, had to be shipped across the English Channel. He had to balance the ambitions and egos of his star generals. The meticulous Montgomery to the north, the steady Bradley in the center, and the volcanic Patton in the south. And then, there was the situation in the north. While Patton galloped east, a massive pocket of German forces, nearly 100,000 men of the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army, was being trapped around the town of Falaise. This was a monumental opportunity to destroy an entire enemy army group. But the noose was not yet closed. The western jaw of the encirclement, represented by the American forces, was driving north. The eastern jaw, the British and Canadians, was pushing south. The gap was narrowing, but tens of thousands of seasoned German troops were still fighting desperately to escape. Eisenhower saw the strategic imperative: annihilate the German army in the west here and now, and the road to Berlin would be open. But to do that, he needed maximum pressure applied to the shoulders of the Falaise pocket. He needed, specifically, more force closing from the south. And the nearest, most powerful force available was not heading north. It was heading east. It was George Patton's Third Army. On August 13th, the order came down from General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group, under Eisenhower's direction. It was a thunderclap at Third Army headquarters in the town of Laval. Patton was to halt the eastward drive of his major striking force, the 15 Corps under General Wade Hayslip. Instead, Hayslip was to turn his corps 90 degrees to the north. His new objective, the town of Argentan, There, he was to link up with the advancing Canadians and Poles under General Montgomery, sealing the Falaise pocket shut. Patton was apoplectic. He saw this as a catastrophic diversion from the main goal, crossing the Seine and then the Rhine. In his diary, he fumed, claiming the halt order was the most momentous error of the war. He argued, not without reason, that he could have continued east, slicing behind all German forces in France. But the order was firm. Reluctantly, he complied, directing Hayslip toward Argentan. But the drama was only beginning. By August 15th, Hayslip's 15 Corps, comprising the battle-hardened 5th Armored Division and the 79th and 90th Infantry Divisions, had fought its way to the outskirts of Argentan. They were now just 15 miles from the Canadian forces at Falaise. The gap was agonizingly close to being sealed. Yet, another order arrived from Bradley: hold at Argentan. Do not advance further north. The fear, communicated from Montgomery's headquarters through Bradley, was of a catastrophic friendly fire incident, with Americans and Canadians accidentally blasting each other in the confusion of the shrinking pocket. The onus was now on the northern forces to close the distance. Patton watched, seething, as precious hours ticked by. Through ultra-intelligence intercepts and aggressive cavalry reconnaissance, he knew the Germans were pouring eastward through the still open gap. He could hear the distant thunder of their escape. He famously pleaded with Bradley, "Let me go on to Falaise and we'll drive the British back into the sea for another Dunkirk." His request was denied. The gap remained open. Then, on August 16th, as the last bloody stages of the Falaise battle concluded, a new strategic picture emerged. While a significant portion of the German force had been destroyed in the pocket, a frighteningly large number, some 20,000 to 40,000 troops, along with hundreds of vehicles and precious armored units, had slipped out. They were now streaming eastward, disorganized but not defeated, toward the Seine River. Their goal: to regroup, reform, and establish a new defensive line. If they succeeded, the war would drag on. Eisenhower and Bradley now faced a second, equally critical encirclement opportunity. The fleeing Germans were heading for the Seine River crossings at places like Elbeuf, Louviers, and Mantes-Gassecourt. If Allied forces could get behind them, cut off those crossings, they could trap the shattered remnants of the German 7th Army against the river's banks. It was another chance for a war-winning knockout blow. The problem was one of geometry and time. The main Allied forces were either north of the escaping Germans or far to the south. The only force positioned to intercept this eastward flight was, once again, George Patton's Third Army. But it wasn't facing the right way. A large portion of it, particularly the 15 Corps and elements of others, was still oriented northward, toward the now closed Falaise pocket. To cut off the German escape to the Seine, Patton would need to reorient his entire command. He would need to disengage from the north, pivot his axis of advance back to the east, and launch a high-speed dash to beat the Germans to the river. And he would have to do it not in weeks or even days. He would have to do it in hours. The logistical challenge was staggering. We are not talking about a single division on a road march. This was the 3rd United States Army, over 250,000 men, spread across a front of nearly 100 miles. This force included 3 full corps headquarters, the 12, 15, and XX Corps, comprising multiple armored and infantry divisions. Each division had thousands of vehicles: Sherman tanks, M10 tank destroyers, half-tracks, artillery pieces, and endless lines of soft-skin trucks carrying fuel, ammunition, and food. This colossal machine was currently pointed north. Now it had to turn east. Road networks would become nightmares of congestion. March tables would have to be torn up and rewritten in the middle of the night. Supply dumps would need to be relocated. Artillery positions abandoned and re-established. Communication lines ripped out and restrung, all while the enemy, though retreating, was still dangerous and potentially capable of local counterattacks. In military science, such a maneuver is considered among the most difficult to execute. It leaves forces vulnerable, strung out on roads, their command and control stretched to the breaking point. Most generals would have considered it impossible on such a scale and in such a time frame. But George Patton was not most generals. On the afternoon of August 16th, the atmosphere at SHEF was one of grim urgency. Aerial reconnaissance photos showed the serpentine columns of German vehicles crawling east. Every hour that passed meant more enemy troops, more tanks, more artillery were slipping across the Seine. The window for decisive action was slamming shut. Eisenhower knew the strategic opportunity was evaporating. The grand plan to end the war in 1944 teetered on the brink of failure, not for lack of victory at Falaise, but for lack of a final, killing thrust. He turned to his ground forces commander, General Omar Bradley. The question was direct, desperate. Who can get to the Seine crossings first? The answer, once again, was Patton. But Patton's army was pointed in the wrong direction. Bradley communicated the order. Third Army was to immediately pivot its main effort. The primary objective was now the Seine River line. Patton was to drive east with everything he had. The message arrived at Third Army headquarters. For Patton, this was the order he had been waiting for. It was a release from the frustrating northern diversion. But the scale of the task was immediately apparent to his brilliant operations officer, Colonel Halley G. Maddox, and his chief of staff, General Hugh Gaffey. Maps were unfurled across situation tables. The colored pins and grease pencil lines representing entire divisions had to be physically moved, their trajectories radically altered. Imagine the scene at the division and regiment level. Combat commands that had been engaged in tough, static fighting north of Argenton received frantic radio messages. They were to break contact immediately. Tank commanders who had been scanning northern horizons for German counterattacks now had to reorient their minds and their machines to the east. Battalion commanders briefed their exhausted company commanders, who then told their grimy, tired platoon leaders, "We're moving out. Now, we're going east." The roads of Normandy, already pounded to dust and rubble by weeks of warfare, now became rivers of American steel flowing in a new direction. Traffic control became a Herculean task. Military police worked themselves to exhaustion at crossroads, their voices hoarse from shouting directions over the roar of engines. Columns of tanks bound for one front found themselves merging with, and sometimes crossing, columns of supply trucks bound for another. A single broken-down truck could create a miles-long traffic jam, a sitting duck for any roaming German aircraft or artillery spotter. And the clock was ticking. The Germans had a head start. They were motivated by the primal instinct for survival. They were moving toward a known destination, the river crossings. Patton's men had to move faster, over unfamiliar ground, through potentially defended towns, with their own supply lines now stretched and tangled. Fatigue was a silent enemy. Men who had fought for days without proper sleep now had to execute a complex road march and be ready to fight again at the end of it. The margin for error was zero. At SHEF, the tension was palpable. Staff officers tracked both the reported German movements and the progress of Third Army's turn. The question hung in the smoky air of the map room. Could it be done? Could this giant, unwieldy army actually change direction on a dime and win the race? Reports of traffic jams and confusion filtered in. Some pessimists began to doubt. The entire risky maneuver could end in a colossal traffic snarl, leaving the army vulnerable and accomplishing nothing. The crisis was not one of combat, but of movement, of sheer bureaucratic and logistical will. The war, in that moment, hinged on the management of a million details on dusty French roads. And through it all, one man's will became the driving force. George Patton did not remain in his headquarters. He took to the air in his personal L-5 Sentinel liaison aircraft, piloted by his personal aviator, Colonel John H. Jock Lawrence. He flew low over the congested roads, observing the progress. He landed at division command posts, bursting in with his iconic ivory-handled revolvers, barking orders, exuding a terrifying confidence. He didn't just command the turn. He personally willed it into existence. He told his corps commanders, "I don't want to hear about difficulties. I want you to go, and keep going until your tanks run out of gas, and then get out and walk." His presence was a current of electricity that shot through the chain of command. The impossible became simply what was required. The turning point did not come in a single dramatic battle. It came in 100 small victories of logistics and determination. It was the MP who untangled a gridlock at a critical bridge. It was the mechanic who worked through the night to repair a broken-down Sherman. It was the company commander who bypassed a contested village on his own initiative, keeping the advance moving. It was the relentless drive of the American soldier, bone-tired but sensing the enemy was on the ropes. The pivot was not a single turn, but a series of cascading movements. In the north, 15 Corps finally disengaged and began its swing eastward, its columns coalescing on the town of Dreux. To its south, the 12 Corps, which had been pushing east more consistently, accelerated, its spearheads now aimed at the major crossings at Mantes. Farther south, the XX Corps, which had been guarding the long flank along the Loire, now pushed its forces north and east to maintain contact and apply pressure. The key was speed and bypassing resistance. Patton's doctrine was clear. Go around them, poke them, but keep going. Isolated German strongpoints were marked for reduction by follow-up infantry, while the mobile armored columns swept past them, deep into the enemy's rear. This was blitzkrieg in reverse, executed with an American industrial ferocity. And then the breakthrough. On the morning of August 19th, just over 48 hours after the pivotal order was given, reconnaissance elements of the 79th Infantry Division, part of the now reoriented 15 Corps, reached the Seine at the town of Mantes-Gassecourt. They found the bridges destroyed, but the far bank was lightly held. More importantly, they had gotten there. They were behind the main German escape routes. Simultaneously, to the south, the 7th Armored Division of XX Corps was threatening other crossings. The noose was being drawn again, but the most spectacular success came from an even more daring move. As the main force of 3rd Army consolidated along the Seine, Patton saw another opportunity. He received permission to send a powerful force, the French 2nd Armored Division under General Philippe Leclerc, racing south and then east on a deep, independent thrust. Their objective, the symbolic heart of France itself, Paris. While this was happening, other elements continued to press north along the Seine, scooping up thousands of demoralized German troops who found their escape routes cut off. The 90-degree turn was complete. 3rd Army had gone from facing north at Argenton to facing east along the Seine, with its spearhead at the gates of Paris in 2 days. They had won the race. They had cut off the retreat of a significant portion of the German forces fleeing the Falaise pocket. In one of the most breathtaking operational maneuvers of the war, Patton had proven that an army could be both a sledgehammer and a scalpel. The results of the 48-hour pivot were immense. By sealing the Seine crossings, the Third Army, in cooperation with Allied air power, turned the German retreat from Falaise into a second catastrophe. Estimates suggest that while perhaps 20,000 to 40,000 Germans escaped with some equipment, the equivalent of 6 to 8 divisions was effectively destroyed as a fighting force between Falaise and the Seine. Some 50,000 prisoners were taken in this phase. Mountains of abandoned equipment, tanks, guns, trucks, lined the roads, christened the Seine Chute. The German army in the west was shattered. The path to the German border was, for a time, virtually open. But what of Eisenhower's whispered words? The moment came in the SHAEF war room. A staff officer had just presented the latest situation report, detailing the confirmation that Third Army elements were on the Seine, that the turn had been executed with stunning speed, and that German forces were trapped. The room was likely filled with a sense of awe at the sheer scale of the accomplishment, mixed with relief. It was then that General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the man who bore the ultimate weight of the entire Allied campaign, turned to his gathered staff. He did not shout in triumph. He did not give a grand speech. According to accounts from those present, he simply let out a low, slow breath, shook his head with a mixture of disbelief and profound respect, and said quietly, "Patton won the war for us." It was a monumental statement. It was not literally true, of course. The war was won by the sacrifice of millions from all services and nations. But in that specific, critical moment of August 1944, Eisenhower was acknowledging that Patton's relentless drive, his tactical genius, and his army's incredible flexibility had turned a potential strategic stalemate into a decisive victory. That 90-degree turn had captured more of the fleeing enemy than the battle that preceded it. It had unhinged the entire German defensive plan for France. It was the moment the Allied breakout became a rout. The legacy of the 48-hour pivot is one of operational artistry. It is studied in military academies to this day as a masterclass in large unit maneuver and command agility. It showcased the advantage of American logistics, mobility, and junior leadership. For Patton, it was the supreme validation of his aggressive philosophy. While his subsequent fuel shortages and the stiffening German defense at Metz would prevent his dream of a 1944 march into Germany, the August campaign remained his masterpiece. The Third Army's pivot was not just a movement on a map. It was the moment the Wehrmacht in the West lost its ability to fight a coherent defensive campaign. The road to the Battle of the Bulge, and ultimately to victory, was paved by those dusty, chaotic roads of Normandy in mid-August, when 250,000 men turned as one. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. A story not of a single bullet or a lone hero, but of an army as an instrument, wielded with breathtaking audacity. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.